But now, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for our first panel session. It's entitled Getting There. And the opportunity here is to listen to industry, to destinations, and of course to lawmakers. We have an MEP as well coming up on stage to talk about what the challenges are and of course the opportunities. So without further ado, allow me to invite our panel up here on stage to join me. First up, we have the Spanish ambassador, Raúl Fuentes Milani, from the Spanish Perm Rep to the European Union. A very busy man as of this Saturday when Spain takes over the EU presidency of the European Union. Are you ready?
Yes, certainly.
Yeah? Welcome.
Pleasure.
Take a seat over there. Lovely to see you. Raúl Fuentes Milani, Ambassador, thank you so much for being with us. And joining us from Austria, we're delighted to welcome Susanna Kraus-Winkler. She's the Austrian State Secretary for Tourism and also has a past in the hotellerie and the hospitality, so you're well placed to be with us here this morning. Welcome. Welcome. We're also joined, ladies and gentlemen, by the well-known MEP, Juan Fernando López Aguilar from the Canary Islands. He's a Spanish MEP and also the chair, may I add, of the LIBE committee. Good to see you. You're very welcome, sir. How are you?
Hi.
Take a seat.
Good day, everybody.
And to get a perspective from industry, I'm delighted to welcome Jorge Casal. He's the Vice President for New Markets at Global Blue. Good morning to you. Welcome. Sit here. We're also welcomed by one of our hosts, that Peter de Wilde, right here from Flanders. He's the president of NECSTouR. That's the Network for European Regions for Sustainable and Competitive Tourism. Peter, as many of you know, is also the CEO of Visit Flanders. Welcome. And finally, last but not least, all the way from Portugal, we're delighted to welcome Luís Araújo. He's the president of Tourism de Portugal. You're very welcome.
Hello.
Good to see you. Take a seat. I shall also take a seat and also just say once more hello to our viewers online on our live stream. If you're using social media, the hashtag is Destination Europe. And in a minute, of course, we'll be also taking the temperature of the room by using some polls. But first, let's just have a chat first about what the situation is like across Europe now. We heard earlier about COVID and how this was obviously very disruptive for the industry. But Luís Araújo, if you may, just talk us through how European tourism is doing since the pandemic and which markets have bounced back and which are still struggling.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Well, Europe is coming back. I think last year was a record year for many countries in Europe. We reached almost 80% of 2019, which was a record year for every country in Europe. And this year we're on the same track. I think we must be 5 to 10% below 2019. Some countries are above, especially the southern European countries. In my case, Portugal, this year is growing 42% the revenues compared with 2022. But there are still some countries struggling, not only because of the dependence on certain markets, especially Russia, but due to connectivity also. And I think that's the biggest concern and challenge. In terms of markets, the United States is responding very heavily to many of our destinations. And I think that's, I won't say it's a surprise, I think it's a perfect fit with what the American market needs. And we hope that this year, 2023, will be a record year for any country inside Europe. That doesn't mean we don't have challenges. We have lots of challenges, but we're here to discuss also that.
And you can see the Americans are here en masse. I've seen it myself as I've been traveling across the continent recently. And I spoke to some Americans about this, and they call it the Americans or the European summer. It's like this dream that every American has to spend their time here. Let's get the perspective now perhaps from Austria and hear from you about how the recovery has been there and what different trends you've seen for intra-European and overseas markets.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me today. It's similar. Austria is very well on track. We had a speed recovery from tourism. You must understand that in Austria more than 80% are coming from Europe, so most of our tourists are coming from Europe. I also can confirm that there are a lot of Americans because of the exchange rate, because of the cultural heritage. Everything is interesting for the American guests. What we see is that also Austria is approximately 10% percent behind when we count overnights. Revenue is more or less the same. That this is also we don't have an open Asian market right now. Austria is still not on the white list of China. We don't know why. There is a difference between the different countries. Not all European countries are on the white list for group travel from China. And there is no information about that right now when it will open again. The Asian market opened later than all the other markets. So specifically for guests from long-haul markets besides the US, there is still a challenge. But we were looking to other source markets, and we were very successful, specifically from the the Middle East and the Near East. It's interesting how much the travel from those areas increased.
Okay, interesting. And let's bring in the perspective from Peter de Wilde here from Belgium, and hear how you think, from where you're sitting, how has Europe's position in global tourism changed since the pandemic? I mean, Europe used to be the leader, as we've heard, but is it still the leader?
I think Europe will remain the leader for many years to come, but it's how you define leadership. I think Europe can claim leadership in reinventing itself as a tourism destination by making sure that our strategy is watertight and is doing what it should do, making better places to live for people in Europe so that they are also better places to visit. And when you look from a regional perspective throughout Europe, we have a very fragmented image of what is going on. You have several regions that are back on track if you take 2019 as a reference, which we would very much put into doubt, but they're back on track on the numbers. And what is a trend that is really there to stay, apparently, because we see it confirmed also this year, is the domestic travel. Let's take my region, Flanders. I think we have an increase of 14% of domestic travel this year, which is tremendous. And there are, of course, you can think of a lot of reasons why people would travel domestically. But I think we need to look at the European level also and define domestic travel as intra-European, intra-regional or intra-national travel within Europe, and tackle this process as a domestic issue. We would never tolerate bad connection within our destinations. Why would we tolerate doing so in Europe if we consider travel in Europe as domestic travel?
Okay, let's bring in the perspective now from Jorge Casal, the Vice President for New Markets at Global Blue. How has the recovery been from your perspective?
Well, the recovery so far continues to be very solid. During the month of May, the recovery versus pre-COVID levels in continental Europe has reached 121%. And that's a particularly good number because despite the fact that Chinese are not yet fully recovered, they are basically around 43% of what they used to spend in shopping before the pandemic. Some other nationalities like US and Middle East travelers, the recovery rate is above 250%. So also in terms of the future, when we look at some of our barometers, the intention of Chinese travelers, 85% of them are willing to travel very soon, and also for them, tax-free shopping is a big incentive. So 63% of them, they point out as tax-free shopping as the main reason to shop in Europe.
Okay, and we'll come back to that topic of shopping a little bit later, but now I'd like to bring in the perspective from our Spanish guest, our ambassador from the Perm Rep. As I said earlier, you'll be taking over the presidency this Saturday, the 1st of July. Also during peak tourism season, Spain, of course, as well, a powerhouse for tourism. Will tourism be a priority for you? And are you expecting a smooth, seamless summer of travel? Or will you be a little bit on crisis mode in case anything goes a little bit wrong?
Well, tourism is always a priority for Spain. This is no doubt. In the program of our presidency, we will try to bring tourism across different sectors, make the first steps towards making tourism a policy of the Union. There are elements in the legislative program which have also a strong impact on tourism. We will negotiate with Parliament the trialogues on the data exchange by short-term rental platforms, which we believe will make a change. It is a groundbreaking piece of legislation. But more than this, we will try to bring tourism to different strands of our work, in environment, in other areas, in digital, and try to put together a policy, a tourism policy, which should be sustainable. And we will focus on that sustainability of tourism regarding environment, digital, etc.
Okay. Juan López, anything to add at this stage from what you've heard so far? How has the recovery been from your perspective as an MEP? Obviously bearing in mind that tourism is a competence of the national member states and not a European.
Good day to you all, and thank you for having me. I'm representing here the European Parliament. I'm actually a Canarian. I come from the Canary Islands, which is a touristic region for sure. 35% of the GDP, 36% of our employment in all depends heavily on tourism. So it took the blow of the pandemic and the paralysis of tourism, but tourism is back. And the European Parliament has tried to help in a number of grounds. It's been said that it's emerging as a new EU policy, searching for the legal basis in order to set a new strategy. We've been discussing in the European Parliament, but we're putting in place also instruments to bring back Schengen, which is free movement, which helps to enhance and reignite tourism. We're actually working on a Schengen visa application, a digital application, which is well underway. Actually, it's been subject to interinstitutional negotiations, and the agreement was reached by June the 13th. It's going to be voted in the Committee of Liberty, Justice and Home Affairs that I chair. So it's supposed to be a digital application, which is to be handled by the large-scale intelligence data agency of the European Union by the name of EU-LISA. Supposedly, it's going to be voluntary. It's digital delivery of visas, all the biometric data, all the data are to be handled digitally by 2025, but it's going to be mandatory by 2031. So we have been discussing a number of elements of the overall new EU strategy for tourism, including this, reigniting tourism by reigniting free movement and making Schengen governance a tool for that goal, which is certainly shared by us all.
And will this be a good news story for Europe, or could it be another hurdle for travellers?
No, it shouldn't be. On the contrary. I mean, certainly free movement is a major asset of the European experience. I actually deem it to be the most appreciated asset of the European experience. But we are putting in place a number of elements within this EU tourism strategy, including the very idea of putting in place agency for tourism.
A European agency for tourism?
Yeah, which would be real good news. It would be a very good signal.
Does Europe need another agency, Peter de Wilde?
Well, it may be discussed, but it's been adopted by the European Parliament, this idea within the resolution. And actually, I'm about to add that the Canary Islands is the candidate whenever the decision is made for being the seat, seat of the Agency of Tourism.
And I'm sure a lot of people would sign up to go and work there. That would be like the dream. But at this stage, I'd like to take the temperature of the room. If people have had the chance to put Slido up on their phones, just so we can check in with you and see what you think is the biggest challenge for the sector this summer, the biggest obstacle to the recovery regarding EU connectivity. You can just choose one answer there. The Russian invasion of Ukraine, inflation, consumers' sustainability concerns, bottlenecks at European airports, or cumbersome border crossing checks and procedures. So if you just look into Slido there for a minute, and we'll come back to you in just a minute with the outcome of that. And just stick to that story on this entry-exit system. Raúl, from your perspective, when will this be working? Will it be something positive, do you think?
Well, this ETIAS thing,
ETIAS.
I mean, we hoped it would be in place now, but we believe we will need to wait a few more
Couple
months.
more years, 25, 26, I think.
I hope it won't be that long. Yeah.
Any reactions here to that?
A good one or a bad one?
Please be honest.
The good one is we're having finally a system that everyone will use, independently where they come from. The bad one is we don't understand why we're talking about this since 2015 and we'll only have it in 2026. I think that's amazing that we want to be the most competitive destination in the world and we're still postponing things. To tell the truth, I don't know why, because we're just talking about the platform. Electronic platforms are done from one day to the other. And if we want to improve our competitiveness and we want to be not only the most sustainable destination in the world, but the one where seamless traveling is easier, and we're talking about visa system, but we can talk about payment systems across Europe or using electronic payment systems across Europe, which in certain countries are so different.
And there's a Commission proposal, in fact, for instant payments.
Yeah, probably we will have in 2045.
Perhaps.
So
If we're still alive, we'll see. Let's get the perspective from Austria, Susanna.
Yes, I'm following this discussion and the developments quite closely. And as far as I'm informed, we have to discuss, there is the ETIAS system, there is the e-visa system. ETIAS is about those from third countries who have contracts right now, and the e-visa system is for the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. So it's about competition, because if you follow the developments throughout the world, and if we talk about seamless travel, then I really don't understand why so many other destinations throughout the world are integrating now e-visa systems, and Europe needs until 2031, if I understood you right, because 8 years...
The digitalization, that's what I said.
The digitalization is the e-visa
digital
system.
Schengen visa, the application will be mandatory 2031, but it's going to be voluntary by 2025.
ETIAS is, right now, those who then have to use ETIAS can travel to Europe without any hurdle, and then they have to register there. So we have to communicate it to all those countries that there is a change, but e-visa is important for us too.
It's important for Austria too. Just tell us why it took so long. I mean, as we heard there from Luís Araújo, it's been under discussion since 2015.
It takes a lot of investment. It takes a lot of implementation from the member states. It takes a lot of commitment by the member states, a lot of EU funding too. And it takes the agency, IT agency, EU LISA, which is the one responsible to secure interoperability of all databases, not only Schengen information system, visa information system, ETIAS, it is even the criminal record by ETRIS. So there are a number of instruments which are to be interoperable, and it takes EU agency, it takes a lot of financing, it takes a lot of readiness from the member states to implement those elements of the strategy. It takes commitment, it takes time.
And it takes patience, doesn't it, for people perhaps on the other side waiting for clarity and waiting for decisions to be taken faster. Have you anything to say on this?
Clearly, the more easy, seamless the process is for someone to visit a country is better. I understand that there is a big technical complexity, but on the other hand, to really achieve the full recovery of the tourism industry, I think all these kind of measures are to be put in place ASAP.
Peter?
Well, what do you want me to say? I was ETC president at the moment when we started the discussion on the ETS and on the whole subject. And look, we are 8 years further. We are an economic crisis further. We are a sanitary crisis further. And we are still talking about it. That is perhaps the core essence of what this tourism industry in Europe is about. It's a lasagna of so many different levels and layers that nobody seems to be willing to cut through the lasagna and say, listen, guys, this is the direction that we're going to take for the future. And to my opinion, but I respect European Parliament, but to my opinion, creating a new agency with taxpayers' money, where there's so many organizations in Europe that can build on knowledge and experience, would be a shame of a waste of money.
Do people in the room agree with that? We've got a clap here from the front row. Raúl, anything to react to that?
No, not really. I mean, just supporting what has been already said. I mean, this is, it's a very complicated thing. I mean, there is the political commitment to put it together, and we are working in different strands. There is the technical difficulties, and there is the commitment from member states. And of course, this is a complex exercise, but you can be sure that from the institutions we will be making our best, really, to put it in place as soon as possible.
But where's the vision? Are we missing some vision here? Somebody with vision for the future for this sector? Because as you say, we don't know what crises are coming.
I think it's not a matter of vision. It's a matter of taking the decision and thinking it's important, so let's do it. We had the same with COVID. The COVID certificate was implemented in 3 months. It's exactly the same thing. And we can all drag along about safety of our countries and recognizing everything. Today, with artificial intelligence, with biometrics, with the technological advance that we have, it's almost impossible not to have this very quickly. And I hope that during the Spanish presidency, this will be pushed a little bit further, because we spent 2 terrible years, and we know how tourism was impacted and how our countries were impacted because they didn't have tourism.
And our
so
borders
if
were
we
closed.
don't build resilience based on this, and this is just a small example of what we have to build resilience on.
If I made just a very short comment, in my experience as member of the European Parliament, never, ever, tourism was so high in the agenda of the European Parliament, of the European policy and lawmaking. Why? Because it went into a very deep crisis precisely because of the pandemic. One of the ideas of putting in place some kind of an agency which would build on the Executive Agency for Small and Medium-Sized Enterprise by the name of IASME would simply be to setting forth a crisis preparedness mechanism, because tourism went into a very deep crisis. I mentioned my birthplace, the Canary Islands, was terrible, absolutely terrible. An archipelago which is absolutely dependent on tourism, it simply went to a sudden crackdown of the whole thing, and the sector started to ask for EU funding, for EU support, technical best practices, and of course, EU money, seeking for support, seeking for funds. So the idea of this agency would precisely to be in place, and to have in place a crisis mechanism for the sector, for the business, for the whole tourism industry, so that it can resort to an exchange of best practices, and there would be technical and legal support as to seek for EU repair, for EU funds.
Susanna,
if never the
that?
sector would be in a crisis as the one we have seen.
What you're hearing there?
I'm happy that tourism is now on the forefront also of the interest of the Parliament, because I remember quite well that it took a long time to get there. But of course, tourism is a very specific industry and has sometimes different circumstances than other industries. It's a service industry. We need a lot of labor for performing. It's an industry where the population in every destination is included in a way. This is why we are also, as you said, we need to develop tourism in all the destinations together with the people living there. This is also why we are measuring tourism acceptance now even more intensively than ever before. So tourism is a very specific industry for Europe. But on the other hand, tourism is also a development engine for Europe. It is important for Europe. So with all these sustainability necessities, with the climate change, with mobility challenges, with all the big questions which we have, I think it's important that we are at the forefront in the Parliament. But of course, we all know political processes are difficult and not easily done. So,
Yes, we have a lot of nodding here on the right. I'll get your reaction now, but ladies and gentlemen, if you do have any questions, you can pop them into the Slido, Also, those watching us online, if you'd like to ask any questions to our panel, please pop your question there. Also your name, perhaps, and where you're tuning in from, and then we can address them to our panel. We have about just over 15 minutes left. Any reaction there to what you heard?
I'm a convinced and proud European, but I do believe that we shoot ourselves in the foot by ignoring the fact that we need a strong future vision, not only for tourism in Europe, but for Europe itself. Europe should be a union that is built on values, and values that are shared and that tie into the common European identity. I don't know if there's such a thing as a common European identity, but I know there are so many communities in Europe that share a history and that can tap into their... Well, let's talk about freedom, for instance, freedom of travel, freedom of expression, but also competition. It's not fashionable anymore to say that competition is at the core essence of what European excellence has been driving throughout all of these centuries. Why not embrace what our history is about and come together as peoples in Europe and discuss about a profitable future for our European people?
A very idealistic, perhaps, stance there from you?
Idealistic.
I'm just looking at Raúl, who's going to spend the next 6 months locked into trialogues and meetings and dealing with the interests of 27 different people from very different backgrounds, very different interests.
It's a pleasure to me, I mean, to listen to such a committed European, and so I fully share what you say. Indeed, Europe is a community of values. Professor, you could explain why it is a community of values. It is there. It is in the treaties. It's in the acquis communautaire when we talk about values. But it is also a community of action and of policy. And we have policies all across the sectors of the economy. And some of these policies are more integrated than others. We have transport policy, which has a very strong impact on tourism. We have freedom of movement and our immigration policy, which also has a very important impact. We have industrial policy. I'm sure that Commissioner Breton will be able to develop. So we have a number of policies, and all of those really, I believe, make a little contribution to tourism.
But still the sector needs more clarity, and the sector needs more support, and the sector is extremely worried, Luís.
Yes, we are. Because we don't see specific funding to the enterprises of tourism. This is a sector made by very small enterprises across the countries. And when we think about competitiveness of Europe, we have to think that it depends on the competitiveness of each country. And when we think, I'll give you two wonderful examples. Secretary of State just spoke about Austria. 80% of their tourists comes from Europe. 90% of our foreign tourists comes by plane. So any decision taken on taxes on planes, on restrictions on air connectivity has a direct impact on our countries. And I'm talking about Portugal, but we can talk about anyone, even Spain. So totally agree. We need practical things, but there are a few things that would help the industry. And the worst thing that we see is after 2 very difficult years that we had support, yes, we did, things go back to what they used to be. And
back to business as usual.
And back to business as usual is not good for us, because we're heavily dependent on several factors that are national, but can also be European. And if we don't get that consensus between everyone, then we will have things by 2031, 2046, and we don't have the time.
Just briefly, do you feel like over in the Parliament it's just back to normal? Was COVID not a big enough wake-up call? And of course the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
No, not at all. No, not at all. There's much to be done, and precisely I think that throughout this conversation we are rejoining some kind of a common ground. We are reuniting through the conversation, because precisely
the idea.
Yeah, of course, the idea of the European Parliament was actually adopting a resolution by March 2021, right after the pandemic, going out of the pandemic, taking notice of the importance of tourism more than ever before. All of a sudden, all of us realized that half of the tourism throughout the world is European tourism, is a major sector for many member states in terms of GDP, in terms of employment, in terms of development, in terms of industry, in terms of in every possible way. So we adopted a resolution precisely to mandate the Commission to set forth the strategy for the future, planning for the future, sustainable tourism and relaunching tourism. So the point is that tourism should be back the sooner the better, but healthier than it was, and providing some financial support and some technical support for the industry to be back to life.
And on that point, you mentioned GDP, you mentioned the financial benefits. Let's talk to you again about your favorite topic, which is shopping. Explain how this system works and why it's important to preserve and enhance tax-free shopping. What's at stake here for our economies?
Well, tax-free shopping, it's a system that it works very well. It's a big contributor to the EU27 economy. If we look at how shopping was before the pandemic, and normally people, they think about culture, about landscapes, but shopping is a really important element when choosing a destination. And tax-free shopping in particular is a key incentive to travel and to shopping. Just to put some numbers behind this, in 2019, 10 million people used tax-free shopping, and they have used it across 350 cities in Europe, and they have spent 20 billion euros in shopping. And those are the direct impacts of shopping. When you look at the additional economic impact, tax-free shopping supports more than 230,000 jobs in Europe, contributes by 14 billion to the EU GDP, and generates more than 5 billion euros in terms of tax payment.
Okay. Would you agree with that, Peter?
No doubt, there is no disputing the numbers, and I do think this can be an economic driver in the old sense. But what concerns me more is the local framework of local enterprises. Tourism is typically a business of small and medium enterprises in Europe, and I don't know what happened, but I don't know if you noticed, but I think there has been a huge alien abduction operation during Corona, because now the labor force is gone. There must be a reason for that. And the reason for that, to my opinion, is that they were doing, we always said tourism is good because it provides jobs for people with lower schooling. That might be true, but we didn't pay them correctly, I think. They worked hours that were not really normal. They were not getting the respect for the jobs that they did. So it is something that we need to consider. Tourism business is people's business first and foremost.
How is Austria handling that problem of labour shortages?
Well, we are still challenged. We do have this seasonal workers permission system, which works quite well. It's very important right now because this is a system where workers from skilled and unskilled labor, by the way, comes from third countries. And then we have the new red, white, red card for skilled labor employed throughout the whole year. There we're still struggling a bit to adapt it to the digital possibilities. But I would like to raise one other point to that, because we are discussing it. Since I'm in politics, I see that there is no platform for tourism ministers and state secretaries for tourism. There is no platform on this level. I really would like to see the creation of a platform for
a physical platform or a digital platform?
No, a physical platform, because I'm sure that talking together, exchanging views, creating networks on that level is of utmost importance for the future.
So you basically want this summit, Destination Europe Summit, but we invite everyone from every 27 countries.
No, it's about the tourism ministers and the state secretaries, those who are in the different European member countries responsible for tourism, because there is no council for that.
So behind closed doors.
And the Spanish presidency will invite all those. They will organize a meeting in October in Mallorca, as far as I know, but this is always depending on the presidencies. If there is no invitation, then there is nothing happening.
Ambassador, is this something you would contemplate?
Look, we have 10 grouping of ministers established in the regulations, and those unfold into a number of groupings. For instance, in Coreper 2, the area, in Coreper 1, where I work, we work with 6 groupings of ministers, which unfold into 15 groupings, formations, industry, transport, agriculture. What the Secretary of State is pointing at is, would it not be reasonable, logical, to have one more of those groupings dealing with tourism itself? Because now it is only part of the Competitiveness Council.
So it's kind of a little footnote at the end of the agenda, so it's not a priority. That's what we're hearing.
Well, it's a possibility that we are reflecting upon. And from the part of the Spanish presidency, we are calling for an informal ministerial meeting of tourism in Mallorca. This is a step. But maybe it can be further institutionalized.
We will keep a very close eye on that. We have a comment from an audience member on that EU tourism agency that you pitched earlier, saying that this would ensure tourism is very, very high on the agenda and that more funding is allocated to tourism, and that, they say, could be very, very useful. And then we have another question from Tim Fairhurst. Thank you, Tim, for your question. Isn't part of the problem underinvestment by EU member states? Visa processing capacity in source markets, especially Asia, is way behind demand. Any reaction to that? Maybe Luís?
Well, it's way behind. I totally agree. Well, Asia now, it's behind demand because of the circumstances. We know. Japan, it's difficult to come here. They cannot cross the Russian airspace. It's expensive. It's becoming more and more expensive. And that's why I say that if we don't tackle these situations, that has to do with air connectivity, with how seamless our experience is, how seamless our booking is of any of our experiences in Europe, then we will never be competitive, and we will lose to other destinations. We will lose to America, we will lose to Asia, we will lose to Africa, to Southern America. And my biggest concern is that we're still discussing in the theoretical plan and not taking action in what needs to take action quickly. Because it's not the time to discuss things, it's the time to do things. And we feel that we've been discussing too long and throwing guilt from the state members to the union, to the commission, from the commission. I think the idea and the purpose of having a strategic framework and having a transition pathway for our industry is wonderful from the commission side, but still, it's not a paper thing. We need funding, we need support from the members. So this is clearly what has to be discussed in a more broader scope.
Okay, your message is very loud and clear there, Luís. Araújo. We're running out of time. Very, very brief comment.
That was the idea of the European Agency for Tourism, because it's an ecosystem in which many issues are involved: transport, competitiveness, social rights of the workers. So it takes overall strategy, and the idea was precisely to help not only to share good practices, but also to enhance the capacity to access to financial instruments, funding, EU funding, particularly in situations of crisis or adaptation to a new situation. And certainly the Fit for 55 and the strategy of the European Union to fight climate change will raise new challenges for the tourism industry, insofar as it is simply raising the costs of traveling, that's for sure.
Quick question from Slido here for yourself, Jorge Casal. Is Europe performing better in shopping tourism than other destinations, for example, the US?
Yes, Europe is doing very well, as I said before. recovery across most nationalities is very strong. And back to what we were discussing before, I think there are more and more countries which are looking at tourism as a top priority. And despite Europe being the top tourist destination, we have to be mindful that countries across the world, they are investing a lot of money in infrastructure. They are simplifying the procedures for visas, and they are making it simpler to go, and they are...
And just on that infrastructure, sorry to cut you off, we have a question here for yourself. Suzanne, it's about investing in train connectivity, because we all know Vienna is a bit of a hub for night trains. Do you plan to keep this commitment?
Yes, we plan to, and there will be also, there is a plan to have a lot more night trains. Because this is one of the most important mobility success factors for the future.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. Any reaction there to anything else you've heard?
We don't even have day trains, so...
Well, we'll be
love
hearing...
to have more investment on trains.
And later on the day, we will have Rail Europe up on stage.
That's another thing. Of course, many of our countries haven't invested in train as others have, or have specific locations inside Europe that don't allow them to have trains or be so well connected with trains. So once again, when we take a decision on what we do with air connectivity, we have to think on the competitiveness of each country.
Final comment with yourself?
I think connectivity is of the essence because it brings people together. Europe should be connected to the world, and the regions within Europe should be connected to one another, but it is up to the destinations themselves to decide where they want to promote their destination and how they want to do this. If they decide not to do this on the long haul, it is up to the destinations to do so.
It is up to the destinations, and later on stage we will have a representative from Visit Finland, so we can talk to her about that. But for now, I'm afraid that is all we have time for this panel. This was the first session. So thank you so much to you all. Thank you to the Ambassador for being with us. Thank you to the State Secretary for Tourism, Susanna Kraus-Winkler. Thank you to Juan Fernando López Aguilar for being with us here. Also thanks to Jorge Casal for your perspectives, and to Peter de Wilde, and of course to Luís, Araújo, the President of Tourism de Portugal. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the Destination Europe Summit. I shall catch up with you later. And ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause.
It's been a pleasure.